But before you leave, I need you to know, and I want you to bring with you and to share with others, you matter. Not because Father Columba Mary Toman tells you, not because Youth 2000 tells you, not because anybody tells you. You matter because you are a child of God. Chris, just thank you for the opportunity, and Youth 2000 for to give this workshop during the summer festival. I've very happy memories of leading the summer festival in Clonmacnoise, and indeed the Advent one at Newbridge, but also lots of provincial ones over the years. I seem to be asked to give the pre-reconciliation talk many times, and real privilege to be present to that. As I said earlier in the workshop, now we're just going to spend some time really looking into what does the concept of the dignity of the human person really mean. Dignity is one of those words that we hear regularly, and we use it in conversation and we throw it out there. But really, if we were to stop and ask, what does it actually mean? You find that lots of people couldn't give you a definition that's clear and distinct. But I remember doing a bit of reading in this area, and one of the authors puts it beautifully, and she was a nurse herself, said, you mightn't be able to define what dignity actually is, but when it's not present, you know it's not present. And there's something profound about that. Though we might find it awkward to put titles on it or put a paragraph around it, well, when it's not present to us, or we have a sense of loss of dignity, then we absolutely know that that's not there. Now, saying that, and this is where the awkwardness of dignity comes along, there's a number of ways for us to actually understand what dignity actually means itself. And there's many authors who will say, don't use the word dignity. It's too squishable, as in it can be used in different ways. There's a wonderful word called fungible in terms of understanding. It's too vacuous, and all these wonderful and great terms. And what they're really talking about there is one understanding of what dignity actually is, whereas dignity itself is a multi-layered term. There's different parts to it for us to fully understand what it actually means. And so if we are going to spend time looking at dignity itself, we have to realize that basically there are two main parts to the term dignity. And the first part relates to the fact that we're human beings. And the second part is how we uphold the dignity of the other person. The first part can't be removed from us, and the second is that part of dignity that we do feel the loss of if it's not present to us, or it's taken from us, or somebody attacks our dignity. And so within those two levels, we get to understand what it is to have dignity. Can it be lost? Is there any time where it's totally taken from us? And so maybe just to start with that there's a wonderful founder of the modern day approach to palliative care, the end of life care, Cicely Saunders. When she's writing about the person who's dying, for example, she had a brilliant line that basically says, you matter because you are you. As simple as that. And it's a wonderful summary. Now she moves on. She says, you matter to the very last moment of your life. And in the palliative care, she has this lovely line, says, and we will help you to live until you die. And the reason why they want to do that is because you matter. And that's why it's quite interesting at the moment when that term keeps coming up regularly on our screens on different contexts. It's interesting, the word dignity has been used by two very different camps on the moral spectrum to try and put forward their ideas. We saw it recently in the appeal here in Ireland around abortion. We had one side wanting to bring the deliberate destruction of the innocent human beings and using the word dignity and compassion and mercy, these Christian terms, these terms of moral life, and using them in their argumentation. And then, of course, on the pro-life side, also using the term dignity and trying to understand, well, how can you use this one term, dignity, to mean the two very polar opposite things? To help us to be able to answer that, we ponder just for a moment in that sentence from Cicely Saunders: you matter because you are you. And if we truly grasp what that means, we're allowing ourselves to see an insight into who we actually are. Because the first part of the definition of dignity relates to the fact that we are human beings. We are the kind of things that we are. We are a human being, and therefore the intrinsic dignity, that dignity that we have simply because we're human, cannot be taken from us. No matter what type of human we happen to be: a well human, a sick human, a fetus human, a born human, a dying human. All these things that predicate this term human does not take away from and cannot take away from that concept of dignity itself. And there's an author called Son Macy that actually draws that out perfectly. And I'm going to share with you his actual definition. So I'm going to read from a page here. Basically says, dignity, that worth or stature or value that human beings have simply because they are human, not by virtue of any set of biological, psychological, social, economic, or political conditions, nor of the views of other persons, nor of any particular set of talents, skills, or powers. Basically boils down to, because you're human, you have this intrinsic dignity that cannot be taken away from anybody, that always will remain with us, because you are you. The chap called John Crosby sums it up beautifully, and he says, what is at the heart of dignity philosophically is the fact that you and I are unique, unrepeatable, incommunicable human beings. Now, we're at a Youth 2000 Summer Festival, so where's the God in this? We haven't mentioned God yet, Well, underpinning all of this is the powerful knowledge that you and I are made in the image and the likeness of God. And that is true whether or not we believe it or not. It's true because it is a truth in its own right. And what does that mean? Well, it means that you and I have in our nature the ability to know and to love God. You and I are called to be like unto Christ. And because we have that gift to know and to love God, means that very concept forms a basis and a foundation to our own understanding of who we are. We have human dignity as part of our nature, as part of our condition, because you and I have the powerful gift of reason. And part of our nature is to have reason. We are individual substances of a rational nature, as Thomas Aquinas reminds us from Boethius and other people. It doesn't mean that we always have to have the power to reason at any one time. We could be unconscious, we could be asleep, we could have a mental illness, we could have brain injury, but it means our nature as human beings has as its core reason and a rational nature itself. And there's others who will very quickly argue, well, you're being specious there. You're saying that human beings are better than the other animals. And we're saying, well, yes, we are, because God made it so. You and I have the gift of reason. You and I are, the image and likeness of God. And we become stewardship of creation. We've become the stewards of what God has created. And therefore we have a responsibility towards the animals and creation and everything else. The monkey that is a monkey has the dignity of being a monkey. A dog that is a dog has the dignity of being a dog. Whereas us human beings, you and I have what Macy will describe as having a big D dignity, intrinsic dignity, because of our humanity and because we are children of God. Now, one of the problems of that is, of course, is that if we always have this intrinsic dignity that cannot be removed from us, well, if you're wrong thinking, we put it in those terms, then you can use that to do absolutely nothing for anybody. You know, to not uphold their dignity, to not do the right thing by them, because, you know, you could argue, well, they always have dignity. Why should I need to worry about any other part of that? That is to misunderstand what that call actually means and what that call is actually about. Because we are children of God, because we are made in His image and likeness, because we have this intrinsic dignity, well, I also must recognize that dignity in every other human being. Which means that we come to the second of the layers of understanding of what dignity is about. And again, we're going to go back to Macy. He says, attributed dignity, which is that bit we're referring to, is that worth or stature or value that human beings confer upon others by acts of attribution. Attributed dignity is therefore a created value. So it's that which we uphold in the other person. The classic example of that is moral dignity. For example, if we all have this intrinsic dignity, every single human being, no matter who we are, well, for some people, very quickly they will realize, well, what about the person who's evil? What about the person who's doing terrible, terrible things? And the classic example is always Hitler and Mother Teresa. You know, you're going, are you saying these two have the same dignity? And you're going, well, they both have intrinsic dignity. They both are human beings. They have a dignity that cannot be removed from them. But the moral dignity between them is vastly different. You know, what we attribute to Mother Teresa, for example, in terms of her moral dignity, is much higher, much higher than if any moral dignity is attributed to Hitler, for example, you know. And this is the classic example that's always given in terms of that which we attribute or give to the person themselves. Now, the classic response to this is always, when it comes to healthcare and how we treat each other as patients, how we treat each other as a sick human being that needs help at any one time. And so if you ask a patient at any time, you know, do you feel dignity? Do you feel that your dignity has been upheld, or do you feel the loss of dignity? You'll find a range of answers, of course. But very often you will find a loss of dignity come to the surface, because as part of sickness, as part of healthcare, there's part of us going wrong in terms of our bodies, indeed our minds, which leads us to a place which we ourselves recognize as not being dignified, you know. And that can be a very painful, very personal response. I know myself, I was a hospital chaplain for 4 years, and I was an on-call chaplain for about 16 years or so around at that time. Also worked in the Mary Curie Centre there in Belfast, and indeed did work with the medical students around Queens. But the profound insight into end of life questions and care came from the hospital situation as chaplain, indeed as a Marie Curie, where I got to witness some of the most horrendous, how put it, biological endings of death. You know, in terms of what the body does when it's dying. I've also worked with people who had horrendous burns, and especially facial burns and almost total body burns and all the rest of it. And as a young seminarian, as a young student priest, coming to terms, well, how do I actually work in that situation? How do I recognize the dignity of the human person behind that burden, for example? Or how do I recognize and continue to uphold the dignity of the person, for example, whose biological system, whose internal system has basically turned itself around, and without being too crude about it, where the excrement was coming out of the mouth rather than the other end. And how do you be present to that person and showing them that you still love them and care for them, you are present to them, and recognizing even this most undignified moment in terms of their experience of what's happening to them at that time? How do we reach beyond that and actually lift their dignity and uphold their dignity? There is a certain sense in which uh, most times there is a moment where there is no dignity in death itself, apart from that intrinsic dignity, that dignity that is present. It is a human being who is dying. It's a human being who's taken their last breath, and therefore the dignity of that human person, that human being, always remains right up to that last breath and beyond. And recently I was sharing an experience where I was invited to join the nurses one day and doing what they used to call the last office, not the last rites, as people used to call the anointing of the sick, but in terms of the last office is when the nurse looks after the body of the person who has just died. And it's a very moving, very powerful thing to see nurses caring for the body of somebody who has just died with the same professionalism and with the same dignity as they had done just moments before, while there was breath still in that person, in that body. And so you ask yourself, well, why? Why do that? Why does that matter? Why do we matter? What does Cicely Saunders means you matter because you are you? Because at this moment in time in the world, we're basically told that we don't matter. Now there's campaigns, yes, Black Lives Matter, all lives matter, but actually behind that and around that, we're finding there's an ideology that's telling us, well, actually, we don't matter. We're basically being told, and we see it in our education, we see it in our politics, we see it in a society, we see it anywhere that has abortion, we see it anywhere that's pushing for euthanasia, we see it anywhere where any human being is treated abysmally in between, that we don't matter, that we are actually meaningless. And there are those who fall into this trap of saying, well, we're just a bag of cells, about 37 trillion, whatever it is, cells, and it's going to die, go into the ground, and really that's it, gone. So what's the point? You come from nothing, you're going to nothing, and basically you're nothing in between. So what's all this around? It matters. Well, any human being, whether they're a person of faith or not, if they scratch their chins long enough, realize, but I do matter. I do. There's an inherent understanding within ourselves. I do have meaning. Now, there's times when people have a loss of the sense of that meaning, have a loss of the sense of why they matter. But as I said earlier, when it's not present, we know it's not present within us. And that's why it's always shocking to hear the amount of money that's spent on counseling and giving help with people who suffer from anxiety and all the rest of it at a time when if you listen to the secular understanding of the human person, everybody should be the happiest we've ever been in the history of humanity. But all the results are shown at the moment, that is simply not true. All these young adults at this moment in time, some of you who are taking part in this workshop will know this profoundly in your own experience. The worries and the concerns and the anxiousness and not knowing there's something more. Now, the fact that we're at a U2000 gathering online means that there's something within us that at least is asking the question, surely there is something more. Surely there's something bigger than this. And even if you're coming along to this workshop because your mate said, well, I'll meet you there, I'll meet you via the Zoom, just to see them online. Well, that might be how you got here. But before you leave, I need you to know, and I want you to bring with you and to share with others, you matter. Not because Father Columba Mary Toman tells you, Not because Youth 2000 tells you, not because anybody tells you. You matter because you are a child of God. You matter because you are an unique I, letter I. And when we're in relationship with each other, one unique I reaches out to another unique I. I mean, reaching out to each other in that way can be defined as love. Now, there's many different types of love, of course, and of course in English we use the same word across the spectrum. You know, of course, there's different, and family love and friendship love and Christian love and the gift of sexuality, the love that's expressed there. But when we recognize the person that's before us, reaching out to their uniqueness, their unrepeatability, their incommunicability, we're doing so in love, what we call relationship with each other. So hence, if I am a hospital chaplain and I am reaching out to the person who has great scars and damage and all the rest of it, you're looking beyond the externals. And I remember a great ward sister taking me to one side. I was 19, 20 years old, helping out in one of the hospitals in Belfast on my journey to priesthood. And she gave me great advice. She said, if you can, look into their eyes. Look into their eyes. If you can't do that, or of course, if the person's blind and they can't see you, then speak to them in a manner in which recognizes their presence. Again, if they can't hear you, find a way that's appropriate to let them know that you're present to them. And if we're being honest with each other, you know, we can be in a room by ourselves and somebody can come into the room and we don't have to look around. We don't have to even hear their footsteps. We become aware of their presence to us. And we do that because there's someone present to us as another human being. And so when we look at this concept and we look at what it actually means, well, it applies not just to the beginning of life and the end of life, which are the two obvious places, but it really applies of where you are and where I am right now, right in this moment, wherever we happen to be watching this actual workshop. It actually speaks directly into our hearts, because you, or indeed I may have fallen for the ideology at the moment, this thing called relativism, which basically is spread throughout the world. The COVID is a contagion throughout the world at the moment, but a more profoundly dangerous one is relativism. And relativism basically means that there is no truth apart from that one. You know, so in the definition of relativism, they actually undermine themselves. But unfortunately, the reality of relativism is present to us, and it's put forward as being neutral, as an, oh, I don't judge anybody. You know, my truth is my truth, your truth is your truth. We have to hold up everybody's truth and whatever. But that's not true. That's not true. There is an objective truth that can be reasoned to and understood, not because I say it's true. For example, you know, the church, when we're talking about truth, we teach the truth because it's true. It doesn't become true because we teach it. It's not because the church said X, Y, or Z is true, and therefore it's true. Tick. No. It is an objective truth already that people outside the faith can scratch their chins and actually reason to. Not all part of a faith is are able to do that. For example, the concept of the Holy Trinity. You know, that is a revealed truth given to us by Christ and the power of the Holy Spirit, of course. But we can reason to God, for example. You know, and there's many arguments put forward there and how to get there. A great Thomas Aquinas has at least 5 of them. If you go online to a chap called Peter Kreeft, you'll find 20 or 21 philosophical reasons to actually come before God. and to know God in that philosophical way. And so this contagion of relativism really is invading every part of our life at the moment, and it's coming to the very core of who we understand ourselves as human beings. Because if there is no truth, if there's no beauty, if there's no God, then there is no point. There really isn't. And as we said earlier, we know that simply isn't true. And we see that in people's reactions to life, to the ups and downs of what it is to be just an ordinary 5/8 human being. We do react to people's deaths. We are filled with emotion when people tell us a profoundly sad story about their life. You know, mothers and fathers well with tears when they watch their children Irish dancing for the first time, or going on stage, or taking part in the play. You know, if there's no sense of the truth within us, if no sense of something more than this physical, then those things don't make sense at all. And therefore, when we go to talk about dignity, we talk about why we matter, all these things become linked. And this is a great thing about the faith. It's like a web of ropes all connected together. You pull one bit and another bit shakes elsewhere. You know, there's this imagery of a spider's web with little bells hanging on it. And I was telling this to somebody the other day, and he says, and is there a big, huge spider in the middle of it? And you're going, no, you're bringing the example too far. Just bring her back to just a web. You know, in terms of, you know, you pull the web this side and a bell rings over here. You know, that's part of our faith. All these things are connected. You know, the fact that there is a God, the fact that He's the creator, the fact that He's made us in His image and likeness, because which means we can love and know Him, means that we have dignity. And if you have dignity, then we are called to uphold the dignity of another person then. And that's why it is never right to undermine another human being, to take away their dignity, to destroy their dignity. And not in the context presently of the I want society. I want it. It's my truth, and therefore it's right. And you're going, no, we don't have sovereign autonomy. I can't impose on you listening to this workshop. I can't impose on you and said, you will do this for me. You will do this against me. You will do this for me. I cannot ask that. You know, when we're looking at the human being as a person, we also have to look at them in the context of society as a whole. Just because one person is pushing and pushing and pushing for something doesn't mean that that's the right way to go. You know, the right person may be the one who's swimming in the opposite direction completely. And therefore it's not a calculation. There's a guy called Bentham, and his philosophy brought us to a point where you have what he called the Benthamite calculation. So it's a what gives me more pleasure, what gives you less pain. And if it's more pleasure, then that becomes good. And if it gives you more pain, then that's a bad thing. And so this kind of utilitarian approach, where even how we treat each other as utility, how useful are you to me? You know, and we hear it in various countries at this moment in time in terms of burden. Sick people feeling they are a burden to society, a burden to the healthcare professionals in service, a burden to their families and friends. Where are they getting this sense of burden from? And it's interesting. There's a guy called Harvey Chokanoff and his team who've written a lot about this and the whole aspect of the dying person, for example. And after lots of questionnaires, they basically discovered that a sentence can be brought together, and it's this. So the person may say, I would rather die than you looking after my personal care. I'd rather die than being a burden to my family. I'd rather die than X, Y, and Z. And what is fascinating about that, he says, if the person who comes out with that sentence has the opportunity to discuss the post-than part of the sentence, the first part of the sentence dies away. It becomes dropped away very, very quickly. Because what's happening at the moment is we're focusing on the first part of that, I'd rather die. And then you go, oh, we have to do something about this. Whereas the actual truth is, it's the post-than. I'd rather die than X. Deal with X. And the first part of that drops away. And the interesting thing about that is, again, going back to something we mentioned earlier, that person is still a human being. That person may be in a coma, for example. That person may not be able to speak on their own behalf anymore. And that person is to be respected equally as any other human being. And to deliberately take their life is not upholding their dignity at any level. At all. In fact, it undermines who they are, and it actually undermines us as other human beings and undermines us as society. You know, you're watching this, you're at that stage of life where you've either about to vote or going to vote, and you've adult decisions to make in your life ahead of you, you know. And there's certain things that we have to keep in the front of our mind when we're thinking about these things, you know, when we're tackling these things. And very often we come at it from the point of view of emotion. And rightly so, because we're human beings and we reach out an emotion to each other. But emotion per se doesn't lead to good decision making. Sometimes it's not that we become cold, not at all, but we do step into a greater realm, and we ask ourselves, what's really going on here? What is really at the core of this? I spent a long time as helping out in bioethics committees in various parts of the country, indeed these islands actually, and a lot of our work wasn't working out the moral implication or what was the ethical response. It was actually working out what was going on. Well, like what was the science? What was the medical procedure that you're talking about? But the actual realization, well, actually, you're doing this thing X to a human being. Is this a moral? Is this a moral relationship between you doing this and what's happening to this person? You know, is it right? Is it intrinsically good? Is it intrinsically evil? Is it wrong? You know, and to be able to have the courage to say it is wrong. See, the problem with this as Pope Benedict calls it, the dictatorship of relativism, you know, imposing itself on it means that people are fearful of saying it's wrong, fearful of saying you cannot do that, you know, and you should not do it. But here's where the dignity comes into play. Well, how do we express that to the person? You know, what we find these days more and more, if we are to share that with somebody else, the first thing that's put before you is you're intolerant. You know, you're the worst in the world. You are whatever. There's a box goes around you, you know, very quickly. And we don't like speech marks, but they do put speech marks around you. You know, you're one of these people. You know, and you're going, oh wow, you're actually being intolerant to me. the irony, you're saying I'm judgmental or whatever happens to be. And you're going, you're also doing the same to me, you know. And so why are you doing that? And so recognizing the dignity of another person isn't saying that I have to agree with everything that they are saying, because it could be completely off the wall, completely madness. No, it's me recognizing and upholding their dignity. How do I share with them the truth? The scripture tells us to be able to explain the hope that you have with gentleness and respect. Because I hold a different opinion to you, or you hold a different opinion to me, does not mean that I hate you, which seems to be the what's happening so often these days. A rational adult conversation is very rare these days when it comes to very serious topics. Screaming matches, what they call ad hominem attacks, I mean attacking the person themselves, the actual person, rather than the argument or the fact that you disagree with. You go by all them and you go straight for the person. And that is not upholding the dignity of the other person. And that person has the right, the choice to hold that opinion. Now, as good Christians, we want to share with them something deeper and more profound. We don't want them to languish in untruth. We don't want them to languish in something that's going to undermine their own attributed dignity. Thomas Aquinas talks about this beautiful language that dignity is dynamic. It should become stronger. It should become more rich and full. Sin has a habit of cutting across that dignity and causing it to wither. And so anything we can do to stop that perceived dignity withering on the stem of the intrinsic dignity, then we as Christians, indeed all human beings, are called to do. Which brings us to the ongoing challenge, and of people saying to you and to myself, well, I'm pro-abortion, I'm pro-euthanasia, I don't see what's wrong with it. I'm not hurting anybody, well, apart from the child in the womb that you're killing and the person you're killing at the end of life. But you hear this rhetoric, I'm not hurting anybody. Who are you to judge me? Who are you? There's something we need to grasp and get and take a hold of again. The killing of the innocent is always wrong, no matter who says this any other way. You don't have to be a person of faith to know that, or to come to understand it by the very gift of reason itself. And we have to ask ourselves as society, is that the best we can actually do? To a person that comes and says, I'm expecting a child, I have worries about X, Y, and Z, I find myself in this situation, is the best we can do as society to turn to that person and say, take the life of your child. To the parent who comes to us as healthcare professionals and hospitals and be told that their child in the womb is sick and dying, is the best, really, is the best we can really say to them, well, take the life of your child. And we as a society, recognizing the dignity of every human being from the moment of conception right through for all eternity after that, has to ask the bigger question. Why have we fallen into the trap of thinking the best we can do is tell somebody else to take the life of somebody else? Surely the attributed dignity to that child, the attributed dignity to that parent or parents and family and society itself is to respond in a much bigger way. A way that recognizes the pain, recognizes the hurt, recognizes what a person's going through, and how can we as individuals, as church, as society, do so much more. I remember one of the cardinals in Scotland was forming a new order of sisters, the Sisters of Life, there in Glasgow, and he was pro-life to the hilt. I should hope from a cardinal, but pro-life to the hilt. And I was on, I think it was television or radio. He basically said, if you find yourself in this difficulty, you contact me, and I will help you sort it out. And I remember at the time talking to people around him or close to him, and they're going, how? how are we going to afford to do this? How are we going to, you can't just announce that to the world. And, I can always hear him saying, yes, we can. Because other people will come on board. Other people will help. Other people will realize what we're trying to do is lift the very dignity. And that's why when you look at the teachings of John Paul II, St. John Paul II as he is now, it's peppered with the concept of dignity all the way through. He's constantly upholding the dignity of the human person. As he went around the world preaching as he did in so many countries, his message was the dignity, not just, as I say, the two extremes, beginning of life and end of life, but every part in between, beautifully talking about the dignity of women, the dignity of the worker, the dignity of the family. dignity of the embryo, the dignity of the person who's sick but not dying, you know, the person who's suffering. And he writes beautifully about this. We see it in the Vatican Council. The document on dignity is basically Gaudium et Spes. You know, I think there's something like 52 references to it. You know, if you go to our own Thomas Aquinas, who doesn't actually write specifically on dignity as a chapter or a series of questions, but he does talk about something like 1425 times he talks about this concept of dignity in itself. And so to go right back to the beginning of our workshop as we're coming into land, it's to remind ourselves that this term dignity isn't useless. It's not fungible and squishable and therefore should be thrown out and replaced by respect, by the way, and autonomy. Respect and autonomy does not equal to dignity. It's from dignity that we have respect and autonomy. This word dignity, going right back to Cicero, you know, 100 BC or so, talks about it now very often in terms of rank and people's rank in society and rank in the cosmos and holding up people's rank and all the rest of it. As time went on and people began to understand, well, how is it applied to ourselves? You see this 2,000, 3,000 years of philosophical history right up to this very present day. Why is it after the Second World War that we had to sit down and actually write down the universal understandings of dignity? You know, because the Europe and the entire world was in such a state of shock after the First World War and now the Second World War. Somebody had to write it down. You know, let's gather this together. You know, and very often that is discovered in the human rights. And that's another day's discussion. That's another workshop. There may even be a workshop this weekend for us, you know, or during the festival, you know. But with the rights, duties come first, and the duties comes first, and all rights comes from the fact that we are human beings, and they all go back to one right, the right to life, and that one right goes right back to God Himself. Because God is the one who gives us life. God is the one who breathes life into us and holds us in life through love. And as Thomas tells us, to love is to will the good of the other for the other's sake. And so as we come to the end of this workshop, basically that's what we're saying. That because you and I are the kind of thing that we are, what's that? A human being. We have a particular type of dignity that's called intrinsic dignity that we always have and always will. And part of that is also because there's an end point for us. There's an end called a telos. The end point is to be with God for all eternity, God willing. You know, you and I are not to be used as an end. You know, so that something else can happen. You and I are an end in our own selves, you know, in terms of that, and that end that is us has a final place, and that is with God. On the journey to that end, you and I are called to love one another as Christ loves us, free, total, faithful, fruitful. The famous theology of the body, ready reckoner. It is my relationship with other people in that way. At times it's very, very difficult. At times it's very, very hard, especially when it's ad hominem attacks against your very person, when people don't fully understand where you're coming from. But it is important that we apply this concept of dignity again to each other, to family, to society, and to the world, as St. John Paul II told us, you know, how the family goes, how society goes, how the world goes. And the very core of that is that this understanding of this world, and just go back to Sumazi, worth, statue, or value of the human beings have simply because they are human, not by virtue of any set of biological, psychological, social, economic, political conditions, nor of the views of other persons, nor of any particular set of talents, skills, or powers. Underpinning all that, the crucial Youth 2000 Summer Festival take-home message is because you're loved by God. You're made in his image and likeness. You have the gift of reason, and he has a plan for you. God's dignity is reflected in us, and through us, his dignity is reflected to the world. And we are living in a time where that dignity is being darkened, is being ignored, it has been pushed to one side. And I've used this example, I'm going to finish with this example. I've used it in homilies recently on missions before the lockdown. I've over the lockdown, I've given many Zoom talk and all the rest of it. And you may have heard me elsewhere give this example. And I do apologize if you've heard it before, but I'm going to share it with you again. And it goes back to me going home at Christmas past, and I sat in my front room with my father, and we talked about the world and had a bit of fun, a bit of crack and everything else. And when we started to talk, there was light in the front room. There's light outside, and as the conversation went on, it just got darker and darker and darker around us, and we didn't notice. We didn't notice the darkness coming around. We were too busy engaged with what we were doing. And then my sister came into the living room and put on the light, and both of us turned and give off to her, the great northern phrase, to give off. It's, stop, turn off the light. That's too much. It's too bright. Carl, turn off the light. And I use this imagery of that what's happening at the moment is we're allowing this darkness to come around us, to envelop us, whether it's relativism or this underlying chipping away at the concept of dignity. It's just kind of happening around us. And then somebody comes along like this workshop, and I know you won't do this yourselves, but when you turn on the light into that darkness, for some people initially, there's a moment of startlement, of seeing the light to be obnoxious, and indeed attacking the one who turned on the light itself. And then you realize, if you sit in the light just for a few moments, you realize, this is the way it should have been. I could have seen the face of my father. I could have seen the living room we were in. And eventually I'd say, thanks to my sister. Thanks for turning on the light. It made all the difference. So I'm hoping at the end of this workshop and in this time together, and be honest with you, we've only just skirted along the surface and broke into it and gone a little bit deeper in various places. There's so much more about the dignity of the human person. There's so much more about this ideology of relativism. There's so much more to do with the fact that we are people who can know and love God. But that's the rest of our lives. To live that out, to work it out, and to apply it, And so hopefully being the one that maybe switched a light on. If for you watching it, it was obnoxious initially, well, sit in the truth long enough and you realize, this is where I should have always been. And if you're here for the Youth 2000 weekend, well, I presume for many of you, you're on that journey already. But just to take away the fact again, you are loved. God loves you, always has, always will. And now it's up to you and me to realize that love is expressed in our very dignity itself. And for us to recognize that in our own selves, but also to have the challenge and the radical challenge of discovering it in everyone else. A unique I, reaching out to their unique I and in relationship. And not to be afraid to speak the truth with love. So thank you very much for being as part of this workshop during this Youth 2000 Summer Festival. It's been great to be with you. God bless you all.
Well, Columba Mary, thank you very much.
No problem.
Absolutely. The amount of stuff, even just in terms of sitting listening to that, and just the way in which it expands your whole view of not just, we're all used to, as Catholics, we're used to the idea of being pro-life, and sort of we understand obviously what that's about, but just to really get a faith perspective of the dignity aspect, and just this wider view was quite amazing. Very inspiring. It's given me a lot. It really has. Thank you very much for that. And
privilege.
Many of our viewers will really benefit from that as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm going to ask you a few questions if you don't mind.
No trouble. Yeah.
That's all right. My first question is a bit of a devil's advocate one.
Always.
I suppose it's kind of coming at it, and again, some of these you dealt with extremely well during the workshop, and there's an element to this, I suppose, maybe you've covered already, but I'd like to just ask you, many of us have the experience of maybe having family members or friends or colleagues or people in our lives who matter a lot to us, who maybe have very vastly different views on
Yes.
this whole area, and the day-to-day of life and the pro-life message. And I suppose what I want to ask you is, when it comes to having conversations with them, obviously the area of the day-to-day of life is a wonderful place to start, particularly when it comes to people maybe not coming from a faith perspective.
Yeah.
How do we sort of begin a conversation? Because as you said as well, it can be quite emotional and it can get sometimes quite heated and tense. How do we deal with sort of beginning a conversation on that level, that maybe we're trying to open a door somewhere? What's a good way to start?
I think that the scripture shows us, and indeed common sense. If we're willing to listen first, an act of humility. Dr. Edward Shree, I don't know if you've come across Edward, a great American apologist, theologian, does a lot of good things with Ascension Press. He did a course called Who Are You to Judge Me? And in it, he talks about 7 different approaches. Don't worry, I'm not going to into all 7 of how you answer your question. But I think the very first part of that is pertinent to this. He says, if we're going to enter into this conversation, which is a motive, and something, it has to be at one level. If it's not tugging at the core of your being, then we don't know what the issue is. There's such thing as a righteous anger, for example. And that's the anger because the innocent has been attacked or the innocent has been undermined. If we didn't have that within us, hearing these things or seeing these things, it's a red flag. It's going, wow, what's wrong with you? And there are conditions around that. But and so that's just acknowledging that side of it. But if you want to have the conversation, well, first of all, the other person needs to want to have the conversation, because we've all seen it where it's just one screaming match and another screaming match and nothing goes anywhere, because one person is not listening to the other. However, if we're entering into the conversation, and this is what Everett says, we do so from the point of view of mercy, which is a powerful challenge. The other day, in the scriptures, reading at Mass, God, Jesus says, "What I want is mercy, not sacrifice." And you're going, well, that sounds easy enough. The sacrifice seems very difficult. Okay, I'll give up the sacrifice side and I'll go for the mercy side. And you go, well, actually, what is mercy? Mercy comes from 2 Latin words, basically one meaning misery and heart. And there's various definitions, but in terms of what Jesus does with mercy, Jesus reaches into the misery of the human heart and redeems it, lifts it up. And so if we're engaged in the conversation that wants to bring somebody from a position that says killing the innocent is fine, do what you want, laissez-faire, doesn't matter, and we want to bring them from that position to a position that says, well, actually, the killing of the innocent is always wrong, well, the first part is going, why does that person believe that? And to have a genuine interest in that, because it's not a natural position to say to kill the innocent is right. So you have to ask yourself, going, where's that come from? And there could be a whole range of reasons why that person would say that. As we saw here in Ireland, many people voting and then regretting the vote afterwards, voting in particular, so they wouldn't be imposing views on people and all that. And then when we saw the 6,666 abortions that happened in Ireland last year, I've come across lots of people who said to me, I didn't realize, Now, there's part of you that wants to scream and go, yes, you did. Yes, you did realize. And why didn't you realize? Where would that bring the conversation? Nowhere, So if I'm reaching into the misery of the knowledge that it was the wrong thing to do at the time, If I'm in there just to squeeze it rather than to lift it, then it goes nowhere, you know, in terms of that. And that sounds easy, but it's not. It's not easy. And so I think, to go back to the original point, if we listen to the person genuinely, first of all, get to know them, get to know where this has come from. Why is it they're passionate about this? Now, the Catechism tells us and warns us, indeed, and Thomas and others, you know, don't let the passions control you. You control the passions, you know. Use the energy of that. Use that term, the energy of it. You know, that the actual energy of the passions themselves. Well, let's use that to actually to feed our concern, our love, our willingness to say, you're also a human being. You know, you are equally loved by God. You are equally a child of God. You hold opinions which are completely contrary to natural law, but I want to hear why, you know. And that's ironically, just to bring it a bit further, Chris, if you don't mind, is where this whole thing around tolerance comes from. You know, this mentioned in the workshop, but being intolerant and intolerant, you know, intolerant is now used as a label, you know. Do you know something? I am intolerant. I'm intolerant of many things: sin, crime, abuse, attacks on my person and my family. I'm intolerant against the attacks on the unborn and making people who are near death feel that they are a burden. I'm intolerant to that, I'm afraid, you know. This, you know, but yes, it's used as a title to attack the person, you know. And the irony, of course, is when we say, you have to be tolerant, the irony is this: before I can be tolerant, I have to disagree with you. You know, we can't be. When I was talking to somebody the other day about this on another program, I'm afraid, I know, and they were saying about this, and I said, well, you and I might love chocolate chip ice cream. I'm not being tolerant to your position. You know, there's no tolerance there. You know, in the sense of we both agree, it's fine. Where tolerance comes into play is when we are disagreeing with each other, when we're clashing against each other, and it's not that I'm tolerant to the truth that you're trying to spread, but I'm tolerant to you, and we have to work harder at that. You know, I remember when I was a younger priest doing courses on conflict management. Rather ironic, come from the north, but but and one of the things they kept telling us in conflict management is that person A and person B has to eventually talk to each other, you know, for the conflict to be brought to an end. Because what happens generally is person A talks to all their gang about person B, you know, see them, see those ones, and we use it all the time. We see it in church as well. Them, see those ones, you know, the sinners. By the way, that's us. you know, you know, and B goes, see those ones in the A camp. They're all, and of course, as time goes on, A and B die away, and nobody knows why they're fighting, but they continue the fight. You know, and so there comes a point where the first issues, whatever that first issue was, whatever that disagreement was, that's what has to be discussed. You know, and the end of a conflict and the management of that conflict, a bit more complicated than that, but basically that's what it is. And so when we're actually approaching our family members, approaching our friends, approaching those who cannot stand us because we dare to stand outside an abortion clinic silently praying, you know, for us to be able to go, am I able to share the hope that I have with gentleness and respect? And that doesn't mean that we get pushed to one side or we allow ourselves to be stomped on. No, that's a different thing. You know, it is having the conviction of love, to seek the good of the other, to will, not just seek, but to will the good of the other for the other's sake. If we have that within us, that God-given call, then okay, I'll listen. Didn't always do it in my early days. I don't always do it now. But I know that the times where I have done it, the conversation goes on a different path. We may leave still holding the same opinions to each other, but I tell you this, we can come back to the conversation in a much better way, you know. And it gives you the what you call the starter for 10, you know, the old university challenge program, you know, starter for 10. You know, you've only just started. If you've felt listened to, if I've listened to you, if we've dialogued, if I've respected you and all this, then there's more of an opportunity for us to come back and actually have the second round of it, or the third, or the fourth, or the fifth, you know. So a short answer you were looking for there, Chris, yeah?
That's really good. Thank you very much. Length sometimes can be wonderful. Some things can't be said in short. It was the way
Dominican say.
That's it. No, listen, thank you very much. The other thing I wanted to ask you was, obviously you referred to the referendum there earlier on as well. We've obviously got that issue still kind of as a pertinent issue. It hasn't gone away. And yet there are other areas as well that we kind of probably need to focus our attention as well. What would you think would be the kind of the next big challenge that we're faced with in terms of sort of dignity of life and pro-life?
In terms of the practicality, it's going to be euthanasia. I can see it. I can almost hear the argument now, you know. But unfortunately, Chris, once a country has allowed for abortion, then anything goes, I'm afraid. I mean, anything, and we see that throughout the world. I'm a scientist by training. I have sat and, as I said earlier, in the bioethics committees and all that. I've seen the stuff that's come through that's just shocking. You know, the very start of the pandemic, the scientists in a particular lab were celebrating the fact that they had produced a chimerism, a human animal mixture, you know. And this was fantastic. Oh wow, this is amazing. And you're going, wow, take a step back here, people. You know, cow, cow human, boom. You know, pig human, boom. You're going, these are the things. And one of the challenges is going to be society actually stepping up and going, no, sorry, you cannot do that. You know, it is immoral to do that. You know, they go, oh, you only said because you're a Christian or you believe in God. Well, 95% of the world's population believes in a deity, you know, but that's not the reason why these things are wrong. Not because I believe in a God who loves me, but rather because there is a God. You know, these things would be wrong, whether I believe it or not, you know. But the euthanasia one, because we've said that human life doesn't matter at the beginning, and you can hear the argument at the end going, oh, you know, you wouldn't do it to a dog. Why would you do it to your granny? In terms of letting her suffer. And you're going, nobody wishes suffering on anybody. As a hospital chaplain, I'd be asking the question, why is this person suffering? You know, with all the medication and all the skills we have. Now, there are some conditions where a person, no matter what they do, it's a less than dignified death, you know. But where are we present? You know, the wonderful healthcare professionals that we have, the families and friends, and the autonomy of the person themselves, all trying to work together in their last moments, right to their last breath. As a Marie Curie chaplain, I had privileged to be at so many deaths. You know, I didn't see anybody die until I was a priest. Never saw anybody die in my life until I became a priest. I was a hospital chaplain, and I was called into a particular situation, and all the healthcare professionals were there, and you had the registrars and the nurses, and I was an amazing team. And what I was so impressed was the young registrar pulled me over and said, Padre, usually how you call you Padre in the hospital for some reason, Padre, you stand here, okay? And when I give you the nod, you do what you need to do, you know? And so there you know, there's medicine tubes and everything going all over the places, and this young registrar turns around and he says, Padre, you know? So I reach in and I anoint the person on the forehead and on the palm of the hand, and then I pull back and finish the prayers from my position, and that they continued on, and then that person died 10 minutes or so later. And why I'm sharing it with you is that the young registrar was the one who asked the question, have you ever seen somebody die before? I said, no. And it was him who said, it is quite amazing, isn't it? He says, there we were, all of us, including yourself, Father, you know, Padre, doing what we're doing for this person that was breathing and struggling and everything else, and then nothing. Nothing. He says, something goes. He says, and if you don't believe in a soul, you've never seen anybody die. You know, if you've seen somebody die, you believe in a soul, because it's just that change. And why I share with that side of it is I've been alongside people where you're whispering into their ear gently, if you hear the voice of the Lord, do not be afraid. It's time to go. And that's one of the things we have to be careful when it comes to this whole euthanasia debate and all the rest of it. We're not vitalists. We do not say that you have to pour every inch of equipment and monies and skills into a situation that actually is futile. We die, you know, and that's part of our human condition. Now we know it doesn't end there, you know, but in terms of that moment, you know, and as hospital chaplains, many of the time where the family is very kind of going, Father, can we just say no, you know, in terms of this particular treatment at this particular time. Well, if that treatment is futile, if that treatment is, if the outcome is so disproportionately burdensome to what you would get from it, then we're not duty bound to take it at all. Used to be the difference between the ordinary and extraordinary means. Those two terms become more difficult these days, because what is ordinary in the past or extraordinary in the past is now ordinary and that sort of things. But in terms of there's individual and every response to it has to be individual. But I do worry that, because you have to remember, was it the Monday after the referendum, one of the first things that came up was somebody pushed for the euthanasia. I remember in the Monday morning, the first thing that came up, euthanasia. And we said in the talk earlier, to deliberately, intentionally kill the life of another human being is not upholding their dignity, and it certainly isn't upholding your own personal dignity, because all we're doing there is trying to deal with a situation we find very difficult, and therefore we're trying to get rid of it. No, compassion is how we respond to that. But you can almost see it, Chris, you know, in terms of post-pandemic and all the rest of it, you know, there will be an argument put forward by people saying, oh, they had to go onto the ventilators, you know, and they had to do all these different things, and they had to, you know, suffer, and therefore, you know, they should have been given the choice to get their life taken away from them. No human being has that choice. No human being can ask another human being to do that morally. You know, they may ask, you know, and you can understand where the asking comes from, as we said in the talk. The whole thing about Harvey Chalkenough and his team have a thing called dignity therapy. You know, how you treat the person in the last moments. You know, to go slightly sideways to your question, Chris. One of the big things we're about to face in all of this is the re-evangelization of our country, and indeed of the world, you know. But let's start in our country, because all these things, the end of life stuff, the beginning of life stuff, how we deal with each other as human beings, how we uphold the dignity of each other, you know, all these things are as nothing, you know, if we don't share the beauty of the gospel. We don't share the truth of a God who is the creator, who loves us, who sent his son to die and rise for us. And so that's the real challenge of what's going to face us next. Because at one level, yes, as you said, the abortion issue is there, and we have to encourage all people of goodwill, you know, to work hard. I said in the talk, to ask politicians, ask society, you and I, why do we think it is appropriate for this to happen in our name, in our society? You know, we have to do something about that. You go, no, it may be on the statute books, but may it never be used. Maybe come to a point where you have a discussion of politicians and others who go, wow, I don't believe we actually had that in our past. Can you imagine at some stage where a group of human beings went, you did what? You legalized what? Oh, barbaric, you know? But we're not there yet. And we won't get there until there's a resurgence in the personal faith of those who do believe, You know, because many person of faith voted for it. They did. They went completely against their conscience. You say, "Oh, I voted with my conscience." No, they didn't, because it wasn't. They didn't inform the conscience. You know, they went against God, and they went against His teaching. They went against their personal faith. Now, we could say that God should just go, time to go. He doesn't. Mercy reaches into the misery of that and lifts it up. And so the true response to your question is the preaching of mercy, the preaching of the good news, the preaching of God's love, and the preaching of God's wonderful and beautiful plan for every single human being. And I know it says a bit twee at the end of it. Imagine the world it would be. Imagine it. Imagine of a third of the voters who did vote. Imagine if we all lived according to God's law, properly, fully. You know, it's a real challenger. You know.
Father Columba Mary, thanks a million. I'm going to ask you one last question. No, that's again huge amount, as I said before, to think about it. So you really got me thinking, and I'm sure our viewers as well will really benefit from just chewing on a lot of the stuff we've been chatting about. But it's really very helpful stuff. So thank you. The final thing I just want to ask you to do is, maybe if you could give us or point us in the direction of maybe some resources, maybe either books or podcasts or YouTube videos, anything that might be kind of useful for those of us who kind of want to go and do a little bit more reading on this or a little bit more research, educate a bit more, you know, if there's anything like that.
There's a huge amount out there, you know, really. I've just finished a short introductory course through Ascension Press, for example. Edward Shree's book on who are you to judge me is actually worth getting. You know, it's completely readable, you know, but it does bring you to a certain depth. It doesn't bring you all right into the depths of these things, because it's an introductory book to this. But in it, he goes on to then describe more profoundly this thing about relativism itself, and what does relativism actually mean. And there's a wonderful chapter at the end, and indeed if you can go on to the is that the Augustine, I think it's the Augustine Institute that does that particular one. He has an eight part video series, you know, on that, which you can just watch online. Of course, there's payments and all the rest of it to go with that. Or watch out for some of the courses that the Dominicans will be putting on in the future. To be honest with you, you know, we're all working towards these different courses. But that one's very good. I found myself, when I was doing that one, also facilitating one on John's Gospel by Edward Shree, you know. And I would recommend, I know it's going to sound strange at one level, but it shouldn't be, that you do both together, you know. That, because in John's Gospel, he starts off by looking at what it is to be a disciple, you know, and actually putting that into place, and then the woman at the well story and all the rest, and how we respond to that. And what I found was, what I was doing on the Monday night in John's Gospel was flowing into the Wednesday night group on looking at the question of the moral life and all the rest of it, because any book that's going to draw you towards understanding the moral life to be not just a set of rules or a set of tick boxes, but rather this journey to the ultimate happiness with God. Now, that's only just one book, you know. Go sideways, you go in the Chris West stuff in the theology of the body, you know. You go sideways again, you have got Jeff Cavan's stuff, which is more scriptural based, and looking at the quick journey through the Bible, for example. You know, again, I know you're going, but we're talking about end of life stuff here. We're talking about abortion stuff and all this. Yeah, we are. But again, unless we know this stuff, unless we know what the Word of God is about, where it's coming from, where it's going to, where it's going to bring us, and then we don't have the foundations. You know, And of course, as you said at the very start, Chris, you take down Thomas Aquinas and you, you read the Summa from cover to cover, read all the way through, take up your scriptures every day, of course, and read the scriptures. But I'm trying to think of other things. I'm looking at my bookshelf here. That's what seven shelves filled with books in this. But there's a short book by a guy called Rosin, simply entitled Dignity. It's a pretty decent history of the journey of the concept of dignity itself. If you can go online, look up Sulmasy, Sulmasy. Look up a guy called John Crosby, Peter Colosi, writing in this particular area, and then there's other there's Dominican writers in this area too. So if you just literally go on now to the huge resource that there is there online and type in dignity Catholic response, where it happens to be, and there are good books out there that just look at the moral life. Again, there's very good Dominican authors out there, and not being partisan in that, but there's some very good summary books in terms of that. I just would encourage you just to look for it, and if you can be bothered doing any of that stuff from beginning to end, go online or go to your shelf, take down the catechism, and look what it says about dignity there. It is a great start. Catechism is not theology, as you know. It's a distillation of the teaching of the church, But there you will get to see the very core of what we understand as dignity. And once you get that in your mind, and then maybe if you have time, look up Gaudium et Spes, the Vatican Council document, and just count for yourself how many times dignity is mentioned there, but to see again that web of connection between the word. And if nothing else, it will give you a foundation to your reading as well. Maybe you want to read more about the dignity of the worker, the dignity of the human person, the dignity of men, the dignity of women, dignity of family. It gives you little nuggets and introductions to that. Of course, if we get a chance, I can produce a bibliography for you that I will make available to U2000 if anybody wants to contact yourselves.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. That'll be wonderful as well. Thank you. There's so much in all of that. Thank you very much.
No trouble at all.
Yeah, absolutely. And listen, I just wanted to finish off for the Columba Mary by just thanking you very much for giving your time so generously, and for just being with us, even as I said, in a virtual sense at our summer festival this year.
Yes.
And we really hope that when things start to calm down and restrictions start to ease, that we might get to see you physically again at a retreat very soon.
Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for the opportunity. U2000 have done amazing work in the past, I know in the present, and I look forward to where it's going in the future, because as we said earlier, the evangelization of our young people, many of whom have not heard the fullness of the gospel yet. And just for those who may be watching at the festival itself, you may be the only gospel that somebody will see today, is one of those great missionary lines, but it's true. And so if we're going to be that person, it's not that, oh, look at me, I'm perfect. No. It's once we realize we're sinners, realizing that the church is the field hospital for the sinners themselves, then we realize, that's why we gather. It's one beggar showing another beggar where the food is to be got. All these cliches, but actually work extremely well in terms of our understanding of who we are. If you think we're a group of just people sitting in perfection, aren't they wonderful? Then sorry, that's not the church. The church, the body of Christ is perfect. We're not. It's the church herself that great saint-making institution that's bringing us forward to that telos, to that end point, to be with God and faith and hope and charity. Maybe that's, if you don't mind, that'll be my final thought on that, in terms of, we said earlier that the concept of dignity has a dynamic nature to it, as we said earlier. You know, sin dims that and dulls it and slows it down, whereas it's the virtues, that's the moral life, the virtues, especially of faith, of hope, and of love. These lift up, uphold, and push forward dignity itself. And if we work on those virtues and work against the vices, then we'll find ourselves moving forward. And that's where U2000 is fantastic that way, you know. And yes, we need to gather, you know, we're incarnational. This is great and fantastic, and what an amazing gift we have in this, but we are incarnational. The Mass is incarnational. The prayer itself is incarnational because Christ is incarnational. And so we have to work out a way, yes, to socially distance, but not to be humanly distant, you know. And that will be a follow-up to your earlier question of what we need to face next. It's the problems around that, in terms of the fact that we have humanly distanced ourselves from each other, not necessarily because of COVID, but because of how we've let ourselves sit in the darkness. You know, are you willing to be the one to turn on the light? You know, you know, someone. I am, and I'm the one that gets attacked. I know, because, you know, I thank God for my sister who that day turned on the light and gave me a great homiletic tool. You know, hey, Chris, thanks very much. Christopher, thank you very much for
Very much,
having
Father
us.
Columba Mary. Really appreciate it, and we'll see you again soon.
God bless you.